tops waving and had glimpses of him flapping about. Suddenly I felt sick. I hadn't killed him. In some way he was disabled and smashed up, and yet able to struggle about. I began to think. For nearly 2 hours that Prussian was agonizing in the corn. Either he was calling out or someone was shouting to him. Then he jumped up. He seemed to try to get up upon his feet with one last effort, and then he fell like a sack, and lay quite still and never moved again. He had been unendurable, and I believe someone had shot him dead. I had been wanting to do so for some time. The enemy began sniping the rifle pits from shelters they made for themselves in the woods below. A man was hit in the pit next to Barnet, and became cursing and crying out in a violent rage. Barnet crawled along the ditch to him, and found him in great pain, covered with blood, frantic with indignation, and with the half of his right hand smashed to a pulp. "Look at this!" he kept repeating, hugging it and then extending it. "Damned foolery! Damned foolery! My right hand, sir! My right hand!" For some time Barnet could do nothing with him. The man was consumed by his tortured realization of the evil silliness of war, the realization which had come upon him in a flash, with the bullet that had destroyed his skill and use as an artificer forever. He was looking at the vestiges with a horror that made him impenetrable to any other idea. At last the poor wretch let Barnet tie up his bleeding stump, and help him along the ditch that conducted him deviously out of range. When Barnet returned, his men were already calling out for water, and all day long the line of pits suffered greatly from thirst. For food they had chocolate and bread. "At first," he says, "I was extraordinarily excited by my baptism of fire. Then as the heat of the day came on, I experienced an enormous tedium and discomfort. The flies became extremely troublesome, and my little grave of a rifle pit was invaded by ants. I could not get up or move about, for someone in the trees had got a mark on me. I kept thinking of the dead Prussian down among the corn, and of the bitter outcries of my own man. Damned foolery! It was damned foolery! But who was to blame? How had we got to this? Early in the afternoon an airplane tried to dislodge us with dynamite bombs, but she was hit by bullets once or twice, and suddenly dived down over beyond the trees. From Holland to the Alps this day, I thought, there must be crouching and lying between 500,000 of men, trying to inflict irreparable damage upon one another. The thing is idiotic to the pitch of impossibility. It is a dream. Presently I shall wake up. Then the phrase changed itself in my mind. Presently mankind will wake up. I lay speculating just how many thousands of men there were among these hundreds of thousands. Those spirits were in rebellion against all these ancient traditions of flag and empire. Weren't we, perhaps, already in the throes of the last crisis, in that darkest moment of a nightmare's horror, before the sleeper will endure no more of it, and wakes? I don't know how my speculations ended. I think they were not so much ended as distracted by the distant thudding of the guns that were opening fire at long range upon Namur. Section 7. But as yet Barnet had seen no more than the mildest beginnings of modern warfare. So far he had taken part only in a little shooting. The bayonet attack by which the advanced line was broken was made at a place called Croix Rouge, more than 20 miles away, and that night under cover of darkness the rifle pits were abandoned, and he got his company away without further loss. His regiment fell back unpressed behind the fortified lines between Namur and Sedan, entrained at a station called Mette, and was sent northward by Antwerp and Rotterdam to Haarlem. Hence they marched into North Holland. It was only after the march into Holland that he began to realize the monstrous and catastrophic nature of the struggle in which he was playing his undistinguished part. He describes very pleasantly the journey through the hills and open land of Brabant, the repeated crossing of arms of the Rhine, and the change from the undulating scenery of Belgium to the flat, rich meadows, the sunlit dike roads, and the countless windmills of the Dutch levels. In those days there was unbroken land from Alkmaar and Leyden to the Dollard. Three great provinces, South Holland, North Holland, and Zuider-Zeeland, reclaimed at various times between the early 10th century and 1945, and all many feet below the level of the waves outside the dikes, spread out their lush polders to the northern sun, and sustained a dense industrious population. An intricate web of laws and custom and tradition ensured a perpetual vigilance and a perpetual defense against the beleaguering sea. For more than 250 miles from Walcheren to Friesland stretched a line of embankments and pumping stations that was the admiration of the world. If some curious god had chosen to watch the course of events in these northern provinces while that flanking march of the British was in progress, he would have found a convenient and appropriate seat for his observation upon one of the great cumulus clouds that were drifting slowly across the blue sky during all these eventful days before the great catastrophe. For that was the quality of the weather, hot and clear, with something of a breeze, and underfoot dry and a little inclined to be dusty. This watching god would have looked down upon broad stretches of sunlit green, sunlit save for the creeping patches of shadow cast by the clouds, upon sky-reflecting meres, fringed and divided up by masses of willow and large areas of silvery weeds, upon white roads lying bare to the sun upon a tracery of blue canals. The pastures were alive with cattle, the roads had a busy traffic, of beasts and bicycles and gaily colored peasants' automobiles. The hues of the innumerable motor barges in the canal vied with the eventfulness of the roadways, and everywhere in solitary steadings, among ricks and barns, in groups by the wayside, in straggling villages, each with its fine old church, or in compact towns laced with canals and abounding in bridges and clipped trees, were human habitations. The people of this countryside were not belligerents. The interests and sympathies alike of Holland had been so divided that to the end she remained undecided and passive in the struggle of the world powers, and everywhere along the roads taken by the marching armies clustered groups and crowds of impartially observant spectators, women and children in peculiar white caps and old-fashioned sabots, and elderly, clean-shaven men quietly thoughtful over their long pipes. They had no fear of their invaders. The day when soldiering meant bands of licentious looters had long since passed away. That watcher among the clouds would have seen a great distribution of khaki-uniformed men and khaki-painted material over the whole of the sunken area of Holland. He would have marked the long trains, packed with men or piled with great guns and war material, creeping slowly, alert for train wreckers, along the north-going lines. He would have seen the Scheldt and Rhine choked with shipping, and pouring out still more men and still more material. He would have noticed halts and provisionings and detrainments, and the long bustling caterpillars of cavalry and infantry, the maggot-like wagon.